what we feel is important, those relationships to people. When they told me I had to learn like hundreds of pronouns in my language, I could not believe that I was going to have to learn this, but it taught me what's important, who's speaking, who am I speaking to, who am I speaking with, about, and then is the answer include me, and all of these directional relationships in our languages. So I really appreciated that, and the fact that we didn't get too architectural ease. It is not my focus, it's not my area of knowledge whatsoever, so I was pleased to hear the foundational teachings that inform everything that we're doing here on the land. I personally didn't come up with a question. Like I said, I sort of sat in awe and just listened to the teachings. I'd really like to open it to the floor then, because we are short of time. If anybody had any questions that they'd like to address with any of the panelists, I'm just sort of here to keep it going, I think. Were we all in awe? I was just in awe, right? I mean, storytelling is
where everyone's hungry.
And everyone's hungry. I apologize if my stomach growls.
Okay, I do have a question. I think within Indigenous discourse, there's, of course, a lot of conversation about relationality. And I've also read a few books on methodology and relationality within Indigenous research methodology. And so I'm wondering about how we can implement concepts of relationality within our educational systems, within our classroom. One example, for instance, is, of course, we're in a lecture theater where all the seats, face the front, and there's a kind of spatial relationship that's established, and it's not necessarily always the best for conversation or that kind of thing. That's just one example. But I guess my question to any of you who wishes to speak to it is how we can kind of promote this concept of relationality in our classrooms, in whichever ways we can think of. Thank you.
No.
I'll just answer quickly because I've been involved in teaching, creative process, you might say. And so I think in conventional, maybe I won't call it Western learning, but it's conventional learning, there's a sort of coarse notion that someone with a lot of knowledge, some people
are asking for a mic. You mind?
Transmits that knowledge to people who have less knowledge. And so from my point of view as someone working in Indigenous culture, there was a growing awareness from my part that it is more a question of awareness. So I can learn a lot from a 4-year-old, because they're bringing a new awareness to a situation. So someone with a lot of knowledge also brings a certain, brings something to the situation. But for me, I'm interested in working with students because of the awareness that they might bring to a new situation, not because they've done hundreds of those things before, but because of their level of awareness of those things. And I think that awareness is everywhere if we tap into it. And so that's a whole different, I think that's a profoundly different notion of how learning takes place. That's all I'll say.
I think in terms of learning environments that probably in Indigenous societies historically, relationship was often just implicit. It would be given, and probably maybe even in most societies, I don't know. But in these settings, I think then maybe we need to capitalize on the opportunity to make things more explicit and encouraging learners to understand how they're connected to everybody else. And sometimes that's really easy to do, and sometimes it's a bit trickier. And I'll give an example that you already raised. This setting isn't necessarily the optimal situation for that, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used as a tool. I know several folks in the room have the pleasure of knowing Miss Sadie Buck. And when Sadie is asked to come lecture at a university, or if she's teaching a course and ends up in a room like this, she sits in the back. She'll sit in the back and she'll watch and listen as the students file into the room. And she'll listen to what they have to say. And they often won't realize that she's the teacher, right? Or she's the guest lecturer. It's kind of a bit sneaky in a way. But she's also encouraging them to rethink the patterns that have been imposed on them, right? And that they've become comfortable with. And to me, I think that's one of the opportunities that we have in Indigenous studies, or just in whenever we're encouraging Indigenous knowledge in whatever field it might be we're working in, is about juxtaposing the comfortable and helping you to take what might be implicit and making it explicit, whatever that might be. I think that it's something of real value that we can bring to the classroom and that we can bring to our learning, whatever it is we're learning about. You know, whether it's anything that's sort of like of a historical cultural note, or if it's science, like, you know, there's still historical cultural stuff with that too, obviously. But yeah, like, just take what you have and figure out. It helps to know what it is that we take for granted, right? So I don't know if that answers it.
Oh.
Please.
I've always been aware of how the arrangement of the rooms affects learning and teaching. And when I taught my class here, fortunately I was in a room with no fixed seats. And so we would change the seating pattern from time to time, putting people in different relationships. For instance, we did a course on the place of men and women. We placed the women on one side of the room and the men on the other, which is our traditional way, and it really throws you into a different perspective of the opposite sex. And I think invokes a level of respect that you don't have when you just mix, or sitting in a circle, or sitting in a square, or you can do those things quite easily. I mean, we can't do it here, but you can always go outside, which we would do, and that throws us into a different relationship too. So I was quite surprised when I visited Trent University and their new Native Studies Center that all the small classrooms had fixed seats facing the front. And the architect is a Native person. So I was just wondering how that evolved, because it just didn't seem right. You know, and they would have elders come and they have to sit at the front. So but we still did it because we are colonized and we are trained to do things in a certain way without thinking about it. And that's one of the first things we have to do is decolonize ourselves, even the first day in class, so that we're not happy with these arrangements. It's a very difficult thing when you've got an entire culture programmed to sit and listen to a wise person. Yeah, but we can each resist it in our own simple way.
Thank you all for raising talks. Something that keeps coming up is the idea that, well, obviously culture and practice and knowledge, they're all not static, right? They change, and it is rather hard, I think, when we consider what is this thing that is getting passed on, considering, like, as Susan, you mentioned, how a lot of the practices, even when the note-taking is concerned, like, it's probably being affected by the fact that colonization did happen, and so the knowledge that exists is a combination of everything that has come and gone. And So I wonder in the passing on of this knowledge, and when we consider building and moving forward, how would, I guess I'm having a hard time articulating this question, but how would we kind of know where we stand in terms of where appropriation begins and where we're in the right place when things are being done in a good way, I guess. Richard, you mentioned the word Puritan when we were talking about certain people who still kind of build in a traditional way. And I was wondering, like, with these sort of ideas, if you had any sort of criticism against the fact that you were taking sort of methodologies of building in a traditional way and kind of applying it in a completely, stretching it further than what was done before, I guess. And whether or not obviously you're doing it with dialogue with communities, but how that kind of, if that can speak to the idea of appropriation versus learning, and if any of you have any comments on that. Okay, that was very long. Okay, thank you.
I don't think I'll answer the question, but I just want to quote Elder Merdina Marshall again. One of my students once asked her, how do you tell a Mi'kmaq idea from any idea? And Merdina didn't pause. He just said, any good idea is a Mi'kmaq idea.
I did actually. There was just one other thing I wanted to sort of bring up, and in the broader scope of the University of Waterloo, and many of our students are coming from different territories. I know you mentioned your children being in Hawaii there, and you mentioned being on someone else's territory. For First Nations people, Indigenous people, we tend to always know when we're in someone else's territory. It's something we would look into. I would look into whose territory I would be traveling to. And I wonder then if there's anything that you can share with us, and I know, working on a Mi'kmaq territory and being here in the Haudenosaunee territory, does anything that we've spoke of today, how does that apply then to the students who come from around the world to attend the University of Waterloo, and some in the room here, and how do they take this back to their own communities and to the Gitxsan West Coast people in particular? For my student friend here, how does this then translate across Turtle Island? Does it translate across Turtle Island? If that was a complete thought and question.
I think that generally Indigenous cultures encourage being good guests, and other cultures in the world have that as well, right? But I think that it can be easy to forget when you're a guest in a place, particularly if you're living in that place for a long, long time, right? And in some cases, it may be generations even. But thinking about that and questioning, what does it mean? I have a colleague at the University of Toronto who's lived in Toronto a long time. She's raised her daughter and now her grandson there. But she's Cree from northern Manitoba. And she actually, every time she starts a new course with students, that's how she introduces herself, is that she's a visitor on this land, and that because of that, she understands that she has a responsibility to walk softly on that territory. And it's a really eloquent way of talking about it, but just, I think it's about self-reflection in determining, okay, how ought I behave in somebody else's territory? But in the end, it's not a whole lot different how ought you to behave in your own, right? And particularly when we think about the non-human aspect of the world, right? That we require all of those things to survive. They don't need us. And to me, that humility that comes with that awareness is a really good guide about how you ought to be acting.
Did you have anything, Bill?
We are all here by the grace of the Creator. And everything we do should be, I feel, aware of it. So we walk softly. We should all walk softly here. That's how we teach each other. we've created a popular culture that's extremely aggressive and overactive. My chief, Jake Thomas, says we should smoke them all up with pot, and maybe they'll slow down. And we'll have a better world. They're moving too fast. Another elder told me, make sure that you move at the right speed, not too fast, not too slow. There is a right speed. I don't think we think about that or teach each other that. And we think that people who are over agitated and noisy are great entertainment. And it really hurts us. Really, it should be a quieter, softer kind of life that we should encourage. And we can do it individually, and sometimes you go into a home and you feel it. And it's so respectful and gracious. So it all comes down to us individually, what we're going to entertain, because we can't turn the whole culture around on a dime.
Like I say, anytime, this is just my own kind of, it's not a rule that I follow, but a kind of awareness that I've been taught. Anytime you're in someone's territory, you've been placed there to learn. So you're not there as a problem solver, you're not there as a savior of any kind. You are there to learn what you can. And so if you are then asked to contribute, you have to do a discernment process as well, and any culture has elders. And if you're not sure of what you're doing, you ask the elders or ask them to refer you to another elder. And so you need to, you have to honor the place where you are, you honor the elders, and honor the notion that you've been placed there to learn. I think, that's sort of what guides me in these situations, and I'm not sure. There might be more other ways to think about it.
I think we've got one more question, and then I think we should grab for lunch after that, and I'll just mention a little protocol that has been recommended for lunch.
Sustainability is seeming to get more and more importance with times. Unfortunately, I guess, because it's all should have always been an important part of life, and that's what I understood from Indigenous culture. So with that in mind, I was just wondering, are there any groups or collectives looking at design from that scope, from the Indigenous perspective? So is there any way because I don't want to say institution, because it's almost against the idea of Indigenous culture. So here where we have a curriculum and it's very orchestrated and structured, I guess, in a really colonial way. I'm wondering if there's any alternative to that already exists, and if not, would it be a good idea?
I don't know how many of you have heard of the American architect Frank Lloyd Wright. Absolutely profound human being who created the most beautiful buildings, but he had a school. And the school kept his students, what should I say, very reserved. Because the whole thing that he was facilitating was so profound. And they never complained. And they had to go out in the field and grow their food. They had to build their own house. They had to do Mr. Wright's housekeeping. No one complained. And some of these students were quite wealthy. And they came out humble. They listened. They listened because the elder was had so much to say. Some of it crazy, but much of it made sense. And I know that when I started going back to elders, I was noisy. And they pointed out, you're very noisy and you're stopping the flow of the conversation or of the knowledge. The elder will stop and then he might not pick up and you're going to miss something. So listening, very important. Andrew Levitt has a new book coming out about listening in the design process. It was very difficult to write because how do you convey listening? But he does it, and it's groundbreaking. So listening. Now I know in the academic setting they say ask questions. I don't think so. You can ask too many questions, and you can ask questions that are disturbing of the actual process of learning. That's what I learned. It was very humbling.